It is by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure. Joseph Campbell. Thank you for joining us for our third episode where we lift the veil around childhood sexual trauma's impact on substance use.
For the first 6 episodes, Elizabeth and I plan to discuss these topics generally, and we're going to base most of the examples on our personal experiences. But as we move forward within our podcast, we will begin to look at these topics from different angles and perspectives. But before we dive into our main topic, please allow us a moment to introduce ourselves. Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Maria of Elizabeth Maria Unlimited.
Thank you. And I'm Jackie Lyons of Akashic Energy Healing.
And together, we're the hosts of Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality, where we navigate the power of personal growth and self-discovery through exploration and acceptance of our shadow selves.
Welcome to Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality. Today's topic, unlocking the past, childhood sexual trauma's impact on substance use. Today, we aim to shed light on the profound connection between childhood sexual trauma and addiction, examining how traumatic experiences during childhood can affect individuals' susceptibility to addiction later in life. Childhood sexual trauma refers to the experience of sexual abuse or assault endured by individuals during their formative years. Sadly, this type of trauma can be extremely distressing, leaving it deep emotional, physiological scars that may persist well into adulthood. It has also been observed that childhood sexual trauma can significantly increase the vulnerability of individuals to develop substance use disorders. The trauma that was experienced during childhood can disrupt healthy coping mechanisms, lead to maladaptive ways of dealing with emotional pain and distress. According to studies, individuals who have experienced childhood sexual trauma are more likely to turn to substances like drug or alcohol as a means of self-medication. They become a way to numb these powerful emotions that are associated with the traumatic memories, and it also filters as a way of escapism of the ongoing distress that we're in. And I just talked about a ton of stuff within that last paragraph. And let's just take a minute to break that down, Elizabeth. How did you feel hearing these words?
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on here, but definitely the connection between childhood sexual trauma. And I want to say, to our listeners that, sexual trauma is I guess a subset of all types of traumas that you can experience during childhood. And, and there's been so many studies out there that links just trauma in general to a higher use of substance use and abuse. And so, so if you think about that with any traumas, then sexual trauma, I mean, it's almost, it can be a direct correlation almost. And it was something that I guess throughout my teen and early 20s, I did not understand that connection between, and I guess, I wasn't ready to see it honestly until I was in my 30s, that connection with, my trauma and my drug use. Mm-hmm.
And thank you for saying that, because it is really important that we stress that trauma in general can lead to feelings of pain, feelings of fear that also can lead to the drug use. Because of our topics that we talked about in the last 2 episodes, we are really focusing and have learned on ourselves that it was the sexual trauma as a child that had led to a lot of these addictive behaviors. But as well with myself, I didn't put that connection together until a lot later on in life. Mm-hmm. And it really took finally being able to link those two together for the real healing to be able to take place in my life. And it really spoke to me On a deep level, because of that dissociation I had from the drug use and the event that had taken place, it's like a light switch went off once I kind of made that correlation.
Mm.
That it was the missing piece. It was the missing link for me to gain the awareness that I needed. I didn't put those two together. So you individuals right now who are suffering may still not believe that your drug use is related to a traumatic experience or pain or fear.
Right.
Um, so that's really why we're trying to help to bridge these gaps so that
Yes,
maybe our experience will turn on that light switch in some another victim or survivor's story that will help them to kind of make sense of their own addictive tendencies.
absolutely. And lessen the stigma around it. Thank you so much, Jackie, for that. And, I was thinking about when you were talking about, why was it that neither of us, made this correlation between the two? And really, I believe that, there, especially in the mental health sectors, there's a lot, especially when I was growing up, there was a lot of person blame. And so, after my the trauma that I experienced when I was 12, and I mean, I literally went from, little girl playing the flute in her band to, running around the streets drinking Mad Dog 20. I mean, it was like night and day, or
Mm-hmm.
day and night. And there was no correlation, said to me then. And so I was basically, you know I was deemed the juvenile delinquent, the bad girl, and it was all about, I had just made these bad choices, and not to take away from my responsibility, because at some point, it does just it is a choice, but that initial correlation, that initial needing for some type of medicine, something to help me with, the pain that was literally stuck in my body. It's just interesting because I held on to those feelings, and I know that we're going to go into it more, but the feelings of guilt and shame just for being a quote unquote bad seed or a juvenile delinquent, making these choices, without understanding the physiological
What
aspects
was
of it.
I called? A lemon. I'm
Oh,
the lemon of the
oh,
family. And
oh
and
no.
it's funny because it does, addiction comes with so much shame
Yes.
attached to it. And it
Yes.
is about society, and it is about the stigma that we are trying to break here today, because there are behaviors that you engage in that you wouldn't do normally because of your need to fill that emptiness.
Yes.
And a lot of it is really, really self-destructive, and some people do just stay in that self-destructive bubble. But even your own self-destruction can have negative impacts on those closest to you, even if
Absolutely.
you're not it's never usually purposeful. And I guess some addiction can take you into a more purposeful acts of means to get money or
Right.
whatever to feed the addiction, but a lot of it is more of that self-destructive behavior. And the shame attached to
Yeah.
that leaves people in these addictive cycles, because choosing to walk through your addiction in a real way and look at all the things that you did to fill that void is, it's as bad as going through the shadow, right? It is
Right.
every bad thing you've ever done. And
Right.
according to the National Library of Medicine, women with histories of sexual or child sexual assault are significantly more likely than women without histories of child sexual assault to report increased alcohol and drinking related problems, as well as substance use issues. And this is a direct correlation.
Yes.
Another study also shows that the pain and from that leads to earlier use of coping mechanisms or sexual activity. So some report, usually about under age 15,
Right.
starting these risque sexual behaviors. So I mean, the correlation is there. It's
It's
very
there.
clear. We
Yes.
talked about it last time. There's really kind of those two different directions you can go, but it's in the studies. The studies all show the same thing. So
All of them.
we can't deny it anymore. We can't pretend it's not happening.
Right. And we need to stop person blaming, and I really hesitate, honestly, to, now with my, I guess, newer spiritual understanding of the experiences and how they occur in our lives, to use the term victim. But, so I like survivor, or,
Mhm.
that this was an experience that, I chose for my own evolution. I don't know, as far as, listeners out there, how you guys feel about that. And I know that even within the spiritual community, that perspective is a really hard one, because people are like, I would never want this, for my experience or whatever. But I'm moving away from the language of being a victim, but and you know on some level, I mean, I was 12 years old, and so at least consciously I did not make that choice to go over, you know what I mean, and everything that
And the
happened.
victim mentality, yeah, we're not to anybody shaming or blaming you for something that happened with you were a child. That is
Right.
not what we're talking about victim blaming. When we talk about the choices that you make afterwards into adulthood to fulfill that emptiness, at some point along our journey, we do become responsible for those choices
Yeah.
and
we
continuing in that behavior cycle. You're not to blame. Nobody chose. I guess what you're saying is, in a spiritual way, we chose to come into this life, so we picked
right.
our experiences. So
Yeah.
even on that level, somebody made a choice to assault you. That was their choice. It,
Right.
but yes, I do. I see where you were going with that. So I apologize if it took me a minute to hear that. But yes, there is individuals within the spiritual community who just will not accept that fact, or they don't want to believe that they would have made a choice to have that experience. And looking back for myself now, when I see it, I understand why I needed it. I would never be here right now without that fear that kind of drove my choices throughout my entire life. It had to be, otherwise I would have never got to this point. I understand the beauty of it now, not the beauty of being assaulted, but the beauty of the journey to get to this point. Does not give anybody the right to assault a child, to take away a child's sense of self-control, and to put anybody, even as an adult, to another adult. There's never an okay
Right.
reason to do something like that. So
No, no.
just to make
However,
that clear.
after going through the experience of it, and I believe that really just also moving away from the term victim has been, I mean, it just empowers me more,
Mhm.
powers. And so and I think that might be a kind of a off topic that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well, we're getting a
know,
little bit more off topic, but
just the words in general, but really, I mean, as a child, and going into my teen years, I really wasn't, I didn't feel that I was a victim, and I definitely wasn't treated like I was. Again, the psychiatrists that I saw during that period were very much in the notion that I was just a bad seed. I had just made
Mhm.
my own bad choices in life, and at 12, and this was the result of it. So yeah, so
Yeah, and
later.
a lot of people do feel, and they have felt like they were that black sheep of the family. They didn't really fit in, and it could be directly related to that fact, is that, you know, that it an incident had happened, and it just destroyed your mental state so much that, you don't feel comfortable within your own body anymore. You feel very displaced. You don't,
Mhm.
fit into the box that everybody is trying to fit you
Abs-
in. And that's a lot with me, is that my emotional state was so dysregulated. All I wanted to do was feel normal. So
Absolutely.
would watch people. I was really observant, and I was able to watch what normal people did, how normal people interacted, or people I guess I thought was normal. Is anybody really normal? I don't know. But then I would create the image of what that looked like, and then I would try to go out and achieve it with
Mm.
certain friend groups and certain individuals, and try to make myself feel somewhat normal. And it led to this really deep seated self worth issues that I would just do what other people were doing. I wanted to fit in, I wanted to be in the cool crowd. So I pulled this quote, and we have this quote from Dr. Joe Dispenza. I don't know if you guys know of his work. He's all over YouTube.
Right.
So please
Yeah.
feel free to go and do a little bit more research. But he says, if you can't control your emotional state, you must be addicted to it. And when I heard this, it had such an impact on me, because I'm so repetitive in my behaviors, it does become an addiction.
Yes.
And with my relationships, the codependency, that ups and downs, the highs and lows, I every time I know it's a low, I know it's going back up to that high, and I get that adrenaline or that dopamine hit, and I'm like flying high and everything is great, and then it crashes, and it was just this continual cycle of an addictive emotional behavior state. And I didn't even see the patterns till later, but
Right.
it was such an addictive way of living life. And it wasn't just about substance, it was that the feeling of emotion that I was so addicted to, that highs of the high.
Absolutely. And it really isn't, I mean, anything on the exterior, anyways, that is filling that numbness, that void, right? But I love Dispenza's, take on this, because really it's about becoming addicted to the chemical reaction in our own bodies for, so, the thought triggers that, emotional state, those what is it, energy in motion, right, that goes through the body, and then that is really what triggers that exterior response of, whatever it is. And it really opens up our understanding for what is addiction really,
Mhm,
and I believe that it's all a type of emotional addiction, because it is
mhm,
being continuing those patterns based on emotion, energy, and motion, and that
mhm,
feeling of cortisol, or that when you get into kind of the hyper arousal state of wanting, whatever it is on the exterior, but it all starts on the interior. And then so it's, when people say it's an inside job, it's an inside job, it's an inside job, and you're like,
I
what?
didn't know how much that actually meant until you went inside.
Yes, and I love that perspective, because, again, it's more empowering than just saying all these exterior things are happening to me. Oh, okay, I do have a choice. I can learn to regulate my emotional state, and I can learn through awareness, and I mean, I have been on this recovery journey for, I mean, consciously since my early 20s, since I was 23. And I am nowhere close to 23 now. So it, it has taken me so many years to even get to the place where I could begin being aware of these, of my own emotional addictions, being addicted to that energy that's coursing through my body. So I just love Dispenza and his perspectives of really unpacking and understanding how we get addicted to certain patterns. Just amazing.
I
Hmm.
agree. And thank you for the way you explained it with the chemical reaction, emotion, energy in motion, because it really is all about our own internal energy and really understanding how to channel and exactly how to channel that energy
Yeah.
accordingly so that we can reshape our patterns. And I think we'll get into that a little bit further
Yeah.
on when we start talking about different modalities and treatments. And that might be a little more to next episode, guys. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
beautiful, Joe Dispenza. Thank you for your take on it. It really reshaped my thought patterns on addiction in general or addictive tendencies in general.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, and the thing with, trauma leading to these types of addictive behaviors to fill that void in, our internal bodies is that, it gets exacerbated by all of the different types of mental health disorders that go along with it, so it's not a clear, it's not like, okay, this happens and so now I'm doing drug or whatever, it's depression, anxiety, like we talked about last week, post-traumatic stress disorder, like all of these. And within each one of those subtopics of ways that, there's so many different ways that depression expresses itself in the exterior. There's so many different ways that anxiety, and it's never the same for, two people can have the exact same experience. And then, their depression, anxiety, or the way that, it's, coursing through their body is going to be totally different
Mm-hmm.
than, than the next person. And so all of these co-occurrences of these different disorders that all, and honestly, I could do a whole podcast just on the term disorder. So I'm going to shift that to maladaptive coping strategies. So all
Mm.
of these co-occurrences of maladaptive coping strategies make the road to recovery so much more challenging. It becomes a web almost of so many, and you just, it's like, what it reminded me of and what just popped into my head, or like those, when you were little, like those mazes, and you're like, you're here and there's all these different ways,
Oh, the dot,
like,
or yeah, get the ball to the end.
yeah. So it's just like it becomes like a web, a maze of trauma, and there's so many different ways that it is releasing, and it's, in these maladaptive ways. Like I keep on, so instead of just going through the front door, it's like, these coping strategies, or like, climbing out windows and go. I don't know if that metaphor makes sense, but it's
I get it. Coping strategies. Exactly. And I
Mhm.
like the word that you use, the say it again,
Maladaptive coping strategy.
maladaptive. I like it. I love that because it's not, there is nothing wrong with you.
Right.
You
It's not a disease. I mean,
are,
dis-ease, as in your body is in dis-ease, you
yeah,
know. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And
But
just because, you as a child or a young adult or early adult did not learn the proper coping mechanisms in order to understand these things on a bigger level, it's that's nothing to be shameful about. Not a lot of people in this world have the proper support system to understand these type of traumas at this level. And it's not our parents' fault, it's not our grandparents' fault.
right,
They were not also equipped to handle
mal
these things on a greater level. So that word really is such a beautiful reshape of that energy.
absolutely. And I always have to bring up Peter Levine when talking about trauma and the healing of it, because Peter Levine really, he was the first to really look at the way that trauma acts in our body from a physiological perspective, which, is very, is, I mean, it's, it really was the first to look at it from a mind, body, spirit, so it's not just a psychological issue, but I love this quote that Peter Levine says, that trauma is neither a disease nor a disorder. Going back to what I was saying, right? The term disorder, I feel, is problematic in many ways, but it is rather an injury caused by paralyzing fright, helplessness, and loss,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so addiction is often, it's used a lot of times as an excuse for destructive behavior, right? And so people will dismiss the addict. Oh, they're just, just again, that bad seed, they're just destructive, they're delinquents or whatever. But it's none of that. It's a failed attempt to self regulate the body, right? Again, like we've discussed, when trauma is when your body goes into that state of fight, flight, freeze, and it is unable to release the energy that was built up in that state in a timely fashion. And so, if you can imagine that energy, if it's still trapped in your body, then it becomes chronic, right? After years of it being trapped. And that's where we get all of these other mental health conditions and all this other stuff, and so it's all about actually the individual just trying to self-medicate. And, I believe that if we can switch, the conversation around drug use from, a destructive, oh, these people are just, they're thieves, they're, whatever you want to call someone who is in the throes of active use. Let's talk about it just being them trying to freaking feel better and medicate themselves, and so, I believe that taking the stigma of guilt and shame away from the individual's choice to use a substance to try to regulate their bodies,
Yeah, like why can't I would love people, instead of seeing an addict as, a burden or this or that, take a
Yeah.
moment and be like, what? Have a little empathy. What happened to my friend, my
Yes.
colleague, my son, my daughter, my cousin, my wife, that hurt them so bad that this is, the end result of that. It all started with some type of trauma, pain,
Absolutely.
fear. It started somewhere. There was an onset of it that was not acknowledged, and accordingly, it was not shaped properly. And sometimes these things happen to people before they have conscious awareness of it. So you could be listening to this podcast, but you felt like myself, this deep fear your whole life. You don't know why. It's always been with you. Kind of felt like I was haunted. You could be in an active state of addiction right now and have not really realized that it is because of a trauma.
Right.
And I did not figure this out until recently. I am 40 years old, friends, and it had taken me that long to put it all together because the incident happened long before I had memory of it. I couldn't
Right.
correlate the two. I just knew I was scared all the time. All I
Yes.
knew is I was always scared, and I didn't have a person or a people to talk about it to kind of connect the dots. No one in my life was equipped to talk on that level, nor did I reach
Yeah.
out for help because it didn't make sense to me. And that's why fear and shame, that's the one. I think the biggest one that holds people in
Yeah.
a state of not asking for help or not, willing to look at themselves
Yeah.
in that deep way. It's just the shame. And we really, really want to reshape that.
Absolutely. It's the shame because, in our society, if you pick up a drink or a drug to try to self medicate, you're shamed for it. Even though, I mean, honestly, there's more people that drink in our society than pick up a drug, anyways.
Have you ever gone out with a group of friends that you used to drink with and then tell them you don't want to have a drink that night? They're basically like, what? You're not drinking? Like, they kind of
Right,
shame you for not drinking. So, I mean,
right,
it goes
right.
both ways. If
Honestly,
people
it
are
doesn't
used to you
matter what.
being a certain way and then you change, they can, then they end up like shaming you from the other side. So, I mean, it can be lose lose sometimes.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that is, if you're focused on any level of what, the exterior reality, thinks about you or the way you're interacting with people, yeah, then you're going to continuously be let down and shamed and guilted into doing all kinds of things that you don't want to do. But yeah, but just this again going back to, the idea that um, substance use is a maladaptive way of dealing with these difficult emotions, such as shame, anger, sadness, and fear. That it's also a way of avoiding and disassociating from the actual trauma, right? I have met individuals. I mean, I've done an extensive amount of traveling and really research on the drug topic, experiential and from a historic and more academic standpoint, why people make these choices. And I've, especially with military vets, I have met um, more than one that told me that their substance use was to stop the um the memories and to stop any type of like flashbacks that they would have of when they were in active duty. And
It's
so
interesting that you said that about the military because I had watched this TED talk and it was called Rat Park. And it talked a lot about servicemen and women that were in Vietnam and they were continuously given heroin.
yeah,
And
especially in the
uh,
60s, 70s. Yeah.
yeah. And so
Mhm.
a lot of them, and they did studies as to how they came back. And it seemed as though the individuals who came back into supportive, loving family connections with, people in support were able to go back into those family situations with very little, um, what is it, dependency issues because they
Right.
came back into loving supportive environments, and the individuals who did not have that to go back to, about 80% of them went into a life of addiction. And it really did go to show how the support system that you
Yeah.
have around you is directly connected to you being able to recover because it was a dependency. Heroin is a
Yeah.
dependency. It's not your body
Mhm.
is physically depending on it. So it was that correlation, and you can watch it on the TED talk, and it really goes into rats, so that basically they put on cocaine, but with the same idea is that the rats were also able to have zero withdrawal symptoms when they had the right community of their little rat friends. So I would love to, just because you had mentioned that, and it is such a big thing with our servicemen and women, that, that just goes to show that if you have that loving, supporting, open connection, judgment free zones, it can enhance your healing miraculously by having that secure support.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking about, I mean, and that's really like the idea of nurture versus nature, right? Even for someone who has already developed these maladaptive coping strategies, if they can get into a supportive, more holistic environment to heal, then yeah, they're gonna absolutely do a lot better. And that really moves us into the next kind of area of discussion for me is, beginning to think about, for me, somatic healing and somatic experiencing therapy was one of the, I guess, game changing healing modalities for me. And so and so it's important for everyone to remember that you can recover, even tough cases, military vets and stuff, if you can get into a more holistic kind of, treatment, recovery treatment. Dude, I totally
I
just.
think, I really think that we're both on the same mindset when it comes to harm reduction
Yes.
style of healing. And I think we're both really solid on that through our own experiences. Not to say that we don't understand that there are some individuals who will never be able to use or touch or be around substances again. We understand, we're not undervaluing other people's journey to recovery and the way
Right.
they had to go through it.
We're
But I
just
think
talking what's
exactly, I
worked.
think what we want to say is that if you are a heroin addict who has been on heroin for years and you choose to come off heroin and you decide to smoke 10 joints a day in order to get through that day, there is no shame in that. That is a
Right.
win in my book. And I think we just wanted to just mention that because we're at the heart of the addiction. We're getting into, these really big things. And we just want to let you know that we do not have a one style fit all type of mindset when it comes to recovery. And me and Elizabeth are really open on that together. And we support your journey to recovery in any way that looks for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I was saying when I, brought up the somatic experiencing, that somatic experience, that type of recovery for me has been all about getting back into my body in a present state. And I know for many, many, many years that I disassociated myself from the pain, and so my healing has all been around getting back into that present. However, however you get there, right? And so, like Jackie was saying, I mean, whatever your journey looks like, if you're coming from, someone that was addicted to heroin and now you're smoking weed, yeah, there absolutely no shame in that from my perspective. I know that there's other, modalities that are, and we can get into that in a later date. My idea on kind of, again, this idea of guilt and shame modalities to try to force people to quit and stuff like that, when really it's about regulating our nervous system so we can allow these emotional states to flow through without, without it hurting us, or the perceived idea of, oh my God, I can't feel this emotion, it's going to be too much for me, let me check out.
Mm-hmm. And I think we'll get a lot more into the some of the beneficial ways we healed ourselves in
Yeah.
next week's episode, a little bit more in depth, because we want to, the purpose of this is to help individuals who are going through experiences such as the ones we've had to navigate.
Yeah.
And we want to provide as many options as we can for our friends and for our families that are out there still struggling with these really deep challenges.
Really deep challenges, and again, kind of, interwoven, and again, it's just not clear cut with other and I always want to say dis-ease. So with other dis-eases in the body, it may be more clear cut. Oh, okay, hurt, this part of your body, this is what you need to do, right? But with addiction and, all of the other mental health challenges that come from the trauma, it can just be so hard to pinpoint it. And so that's why, again, just emphasizing the importance of a supportive, holistic environment. And when I say holistic, I mean, an environment, in the medical field, integrative medicine has been getting really big lately. And that is really looking at the person from the mind, body, spirit perspective. Maybe not so much spirit in the real traditional medical fields, but for me, holistic health is about looking at the whole body, right? The mind and spirit. And so I'm thankful that we are moving towards that collectively, because when I was coming up and in the mental health system in the 1980s, it was not like that. And honestly, I feel that I was traumatized, like, re-traumatized by some of the quote unquote therapeutic treatments that I received. And so I am someone today that I advocate for either. I mean, if you need inpatient, then, you can do that, especially for people that have a dependence and need to have that detox component. But home-based or inpatient, holistic wellness treatment over our more traditional medical treatment, because I feel that the more traditional way is just focusing on one aspect of the body, whereas a holistic wellness treatments are looking at the mind, body, and spirit. So just
Thank you. Yeah. And I know for a fact that there is a lot more of holistic based approaches that
yeah,
have opened up in the last few years. Like you said, in the 80s, there was really this one style fits all type of treatment. And if you cannot find or afford a holistic wellness center, most cities now do have more of a smart based therapy or a cognitive behavioral style therapy for outpatients, usually for free through the government services. And
right.
that is one that is more generated towards shaping your subconscious mind. And I would
Absolutely.
suggest that still, especially because it is really that harm reduction mentality. It
Yes.
doesn't get fully into the spirit side of things, but it really does open us up to doorways towards a more holistic approach. So they do touch on a lot of things where we get back into meditation, repetitive behaviors. And so please look into that as well, friends, because I know for a fact in major cities across Canada, those are free. They are provided through the
Right.
government of Canada, and it is more of an outpatient approach. But I learned so much about the way the brain works, and learning to kind of take that information and then make it work for me. It was really more of a self treatment. I had to take that information and then make it work for myself through my own personal practices. But I was able to do it and by myself without having to do inpatient. And I know people have children and
Right.
families and financial restrictions. So I just wanted to throw that in there before we start moving into some more question or moving into a bit of questions about our own journey. Just because it's free and I know it's there and it does work. The information is so valuable. So please,
Yeah, I
uh,
like smart recovery as well. And I actually tried it. And while you were talking about it, what my mind went to was, cognitive behavioral therapy and the smart recovery it's a wonderful model. I think that the people that are implementing it, I mean, for me down south, we are, I'm in Georgia, and we're, I always tell people I love, the flora and fauna down here in Georgia. Like, we're almost a continent. I love my Georgia, but the people can be very challenging. And um And some of our ideas, I believe, are pretty outdated. And so you can have, even if you have the smart recovery, books, but you have a practitioner that is still very steeped in this guilt shame model trying to teach you about it, then so
It
for instance,
is, and like I said, so much of your recovery is based on the people that you surround
yes.
yourself with, and that means environments too. I'm in Canada. Elizabeth is in Georgia. We did not grow up with the same surroundings, with the same culture and societal surroundings. So that also, exactly, Elizabeth, huge plays a huge part in your recovery and the
Absolutely.
mindset around recovery.
So like quickly to share a example of this. So I actually did the smart recovery in an outpatient, and it is supposed to be harm reduction, which is don't shame the individual, for meet the individual where they're at. But I had a counselor in there who was very much steeped in the 12-step tradition, and the way that he came about me questioning being totally abstinent from everything and continuing to want to partake in, marijuana for pain control. He really shamed me about that and was like, why would you even want to do that? Why would you? And I was like, because I like the
Because it
feeling.
helps her. I know, I'm from Canada. They were all like, yes,
you
use
know,
weed. You're like, we'll buy it for you. Just get off the heroin.
in my head, I'm like, I'm not smoking crack. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not snorting cocaine. I'm like, and so in my head, that's a win. That was a win for me. But because he was coming from a classic 12 step, if you pick up anything, then you have failed and you have to start again kind of modality, then he still tried to guilt and shame me into putting down a natural medicine that I felt was beneficial for me at the time. So just,
And
just
it
kind of,
does go to show that there are, like we said, there's those cultural differences in the areas in which we live in. There are some, Canada has been legalized marijuana for quite a long time. So
right.
the Canadian mindset around marijuana use has never been to the extent of America, and in some states, people being locked up for 20 or so years for a joint. In Canada, it's been decriminalized since I was 15. You'd get a fine, and the police officer would probably take your joint and go around the corner and smoke it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, so there are those limitations and restrictions based on environments as well. And it's so important to understand that for yourself.
Jackie, and thank you for bringing that up because we're getting to know each other through this podcast, and we were, I was raised in the States, you were raised in Canada, and so we do have different cultural experiences around our individual substance use journeys. So could you tell us a little bit about your addiction journey or your substance use?
Yeah, definitely. Addiction. I actually started smoking weed when I was probably about 10 or 11. Around the same time, I started smoking cigarettes. And my parents smoked. My dad smoked weed. So the first place I took weed was from my dad's stash. Thanks, Dad. No blame there. But it was to fit in. So I had a deep rooted self worth. I just felt like, as I kind of mentioned before, I was never felt normal. Uh, Looking back, it really started from this fear that I always had. So I had really developed a way of attaching to people almost as if people were addictions to
Mm.
me, because I felt I would attach myself to people who made me feel safe. And a lot of those people, as I come to realize later in life, had a certain energy, which was aggression. And aggressive energy made me feel safe because I felt like even women too, women that are aggressive, just made me feel like if something went down, they're going all in. Like they're kind of crazy, a little bit like me. They're just they'll
Right.
protect me. And then they were usually older than me. And so I got into the smoking of the weed very early. And by grade 8, we were smoking weed every day at school. We were bringing in liquor in Gatorade bottles as if it, if it was drinking it in high school, junior high, and that kind of continued through high schools. And once we got into high school, we really wanted to get into the psychedelics, so we were doing mushrooms, acid, ecstasy. One time it was reckless. It was a reckless journey. We had found out at there was a place in Edmonton that these plants grew. It's called datura. It's almost like a peyote type of a drug. And we're 15 and we're like, sure, let's filter it through coffee. And we just did it. No problem, no worry,
Wow.
no question. And it just kind of continued from there. I really didn't see that my drug use was related to the traumatic experience that I had. I always knew it was a form of, it started because I wanted to fit in. And it just kept continuing from there.
That
And,
love, right?
down through many different type of drugs, but even up until like when me and my husband kind of hit that rock bottom point in our drug use, where finally I realized something had to change, which is about 5 years ago. But in my mind, I couldn't envision what a life without cocaine. That was my main one, friends. I couldn't imagine what my life would look like without cocaine.
Right. Well,
I
so you said that 5 years ago was really when you began to understand that substance use was a problem for you.
That's when I saw it as a problem. It took a long time to figure out, that exactly, to get past that point where I could not see myself without it. And I didn't want to. I enjoyed it. It was
Yeah.
an enjoy, like, even though I hated, like, the patterns we would go down when we were on it.
Yes.
I could not envision my life without it. And
Because it was
I had,
filling a void, right? And I
it
mean, it was,
was
yeah, it's kind of like me. I mean, it worked until it didn't.
exactly. So that's kind of, the main part of the journey. And I think I'll get a little bit more in a little bit later, guys, about, once I finally did make that step. But the journey was just, yeah, it didn't make sense that addiction was filling a void, or I wouldn't want to believe it. Maybe I'm not too sure why. I just couldn't. I wouldn't put those two together because that would make me responsible to change it, and I wasn't ready for that. I didn't want. So we'll leave it there. We'll put a pin in that for now, and I
Okay.
will push over to you and kind of get a little bit about understanding about you. Like, when was the first time you even tried drugs and alcohol or
Wow.
alcohol?
Yeah, alcohol, I, and this was really, well, let's see. Alcohol, I tried, my dad drank beer and he brewed beer. He was a chemist. So and then I remember at like holidays when we go down to St. Augustine that they always had Kahlua and cream, and I love that. So Kahlua and cream and Moosehead beer were like, which like saying that out loud kind of makes me feel a little nauseous, that combination. But those are my first alcohol, and but I was very intrigued with the idea of drug use. Honestly, before I ever tried it. I read a book in the 5th grade called Ask Me If I Care by H.B. Gilmore. And it was about a girl who moved from Florida up to New York. She gets in with the bad crowd. She meets this guy. Oh, he's so cute. And I loved that book so much. And she started doing drugs. The funny thing is that the last chapter of that book is all about her, going to rehab and getting clean. And I, even in the 5th grade, I would just skip the last chapter and then go and then go back to the beginning. And so like my mom smoked cigarettes And so the girl in the book would like, she would hide stuff. And honestly, I don't know if this is another topic. With like the idea of drugs and the sneakiness and stuff, but the girl in the book was very sneaky about stuff. And so I started doing things like I would take my mom's cigarettes and like roll them up in tinfoil and put them in the top drawer. And then like when my parents weren't there, I'd pull out a cigarette, and I wouldn't even, this was before I even lit it and smoked it, but I would just stand in the mirror and hold it, or let it hang out of my mouth and try to do like a James Dean kind of, really was all
Mm-hmm.
about that coolness. And when you were talking about that, it's funny because I didn't really think that I associated with that. But yeah, and I think that wanting to fit in, wanting to have the love, that love, and it's like we're trying to fill these voids, and again, inside job, but at the time it was everything on the exterior. I was so young. And so fast forward after the traumatic event occurred when I was 12, within 6 months I was drinking, just to the point of blacking out, smoking anything I could get my hands on. I mean, I'd smoke weed. We stole it from our friend's dad, so definitely a commonality there. And but I mean, I tried nutmeg. I tried to smoke banana peels. I was like anything to get me out of this body, I would try it. I mean, I went
Mm.
puffing period where Scotch Guard was really big when I was in the late 1980s. We would go steal bottles of Scotch Guard and huff it. I mean, it was just insane. I mean, like like how quick it just, I would like, the first, and I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, just the excessive amount and how quick and how versatile, like anything. I mean, I was open pretty much to trying anything at an excessive amount. So by the time I was 15, I was using a good amount. I mean, I had already started, dabbling in the sales of, the underground commerce. I was doing LSD, a lot of LSD. I was actually taken ward of the state at 15 while I was under the influence of LSD and put in Georgia Regional for a month. My drug history was quick and it was extreme. By 16, I was doing cocaine, I was dealing it, I was basically on the streets.
Mhm.
So 12 to, it was just like full force. I mean, someone probably could have given me an ounce of cocaine and I would have done it all by the time I was 16, and still wanted more. I mean, it was just insane, my appetite for trying to numb my body. And I used to joke and be like, oh, I'm equal opportunity. I'm not like, as it doesn't matter. Like if it's gonna get me fucked up and out of my head, then I'm gonna do it.
It's like
It was
I don't discriminate, just whatever.
right. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, I just, every day I just,
Well, and
oh,
please know, everybody, that we can look back now after all of the healing that we've gone through and have a little bit of sense of humor with our own selves and our own journey. We were children, and some of the stuff
right.
can be laughed at a later point in your journey. And thankfully, we're at a place where we can kind of take that lighter hearted approach to some of the challenges we face, and we need to be able to do that.
We
But
do.
you might not be at a point in your journey where you can yet, but it does get there. You can then kind of give yourself a little
Yeah.
bit of a break once you realize why and how you got where you are?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I mean, humor for me is a way to, deal with difficult situations. And I have used humor inappropriately my entire life. But also humor in general is, I mean, I really do look at it as a healing modality. And so
Mhm.
being able to just not take everything so seriously, because I mean, Lord knows if I didn't have humor, I mean, I don't even think that I would be alive now. I mean,
Mhm.
the extent of the trauma that I've experienced in my life, from, I mean, because after 12, I mean, just like we talked about last week, that especially with sexual trauma, that it was like, I would end up in very similar situations as my original trauma over and over and over again, trying to, from a physiological standpoint, to get my body out of that initial state. But it would just happen. So I was re-traumatized over and
Mhm.
over and through my life. And so yeah, I mean, it was like pretty much it ain't over to the fat lady in Decatur sing kind of kind of deal.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, but here I am. So um it took me a long time to get to a place where I could, like you said, even look at my drug use as any type of, because I had been so seeped into the idea that, I mean, I was a bad seed and I went with it. So instead of
Mhm.
like, oh, not bad, trying to prove people wrong, I just took on that persona of the outcast, the bad
It gives
seed.
you a comfort zone, like a
Yeah.
place where you don't have to take accountability. Oh, I was born. I'm just a
I,
bad
I
seed.
was
I'm a
bad,
lemon.
motherfucker. Excuse my language.
It's
But I was
okay. We
like,
we clicked the explicit button on Spotify,
okay,
so we're allowed to swear.
thank you. But yeah, so I just took on that persona and I went with it. So, really between 12, 13, and about 23, I was 100%, I mean, balls to the wall. I don't give a shit. I'm gonna do as much as I can find and I'm gonna get it however I can get it. And that was what I did for 10 straight years, pretty much all over the country too, because I was, traveling at that point as well. And I mean, when I say traveling, I mean hitchhiking and hopping trains and just putting myself in the most risky situations that you could
Yep.
imagine.
As
Hmm.
we as we discussed last time too, with on the last episode with that one as well. Yeah, really just getting into those situations.
Just over and over. But like I really want to end on a good note with this. So what, for you, out of what has been one of the biggest game changers for you in regards of your journey with substance use and getting you to where you are now?
Well, I had a very limited view at the beginning. I guess one thing that really hindered my progress is this belief that I had to do it forever. Like if I was going to stop using, it had to be forever. And it really held me back for a long time because, like I said, I had a really hard time seeing myself without drugs, especially weed. Weed is something like 11 years old. You're doing weed from 11. I'm 40 now every day.
Right.
I just couldn't see myself. So once I let go of that version of what the expectation around addiction is, and as we go through further, my opinion on drugs, I am not against drugs. I honestly do believe we are here to have a human experience. We are here to enjoy everything that this earth has to offer. I am
Yes.
more focused on plant based healing medicines right now, but I am against dependency. I am
Mm,
against dependency in all of its forms. And this is drugs, this is alcohol, this is cigarettes, this
yeah,
can be dependency on emotional regulation or
yeah.
outside sources to feel my emotional regulation. And that was kind of the biggest game changer for me, because that keeps me in a place where there is no judgment and there is no shame and there is no, I can finally release that. And it's not a forever thing. If I want to go and do a line tomorrow, I can, but I am not dependent that my emotional state will not, need to come back into balance because of that line. And if
Right.
I'm out and I'm having fun and I choose to do so, that's a choice and I can make it, but I'm not dependent to wake up the next morning and then repeat that cycle. And I believe through my cognitive behavioral therapy that I have reshaped those pathways in order for me to have this view. That does
Mm,
not
yeah.
limit my perception of the tendencies I have to be able to head back down that path. So
Hmm.
now it is an active choice. And now I do choose to, partake in more of a plant based healing, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit further into what I mean by that and what substances I use in order to facilitate that need. But and that just goes by allowing me to understand what is good for me in my journey. That might not be the same for somebody else's. And I think about the really big thing was about that caring about what other people's opinion were over what was
Yeah.
actually good for me. And
Yes.
I really do think that that was the biggest game changer for me, is just to reshape that in my own mind to make it work for me. And yeah, that's kind of, I think, where I'll leave that one for that. But kind of the same question for you. What is your opinion on drugs and alcohol now that you've gone through such a challenging, in I guess, really involved journey?
Yes. Yeah, I agree pretty much 100% with what you were saying. I do believe in a more harm reduction model. Throughout my 30 plus years of drug use and recovery, I have, I've used a variety of and have tried a variety of healing modalities, including the more traditional 12 step. Um, and I feel, and one of the reasons why I made the conscious choice to leave that organization was because of the guilt and shame kind of model. It reminded me, in the 80s, they were there, it was like this whole like scared straight kind of thing, so that energy of being in fear. Oh, I don't want to do it because I'm too scared. And so really, like the game changer for me, and just like what you were saying, was learning that it's an inside job and beginning to dissipate the energy of guilt and shame and fear from my exterior, coping strategies. So once I was able to, move away from that energy, and let me tell you, it has been a process. It has been a process. Um, and I say a lot that, this recovery journey is not for the faint of heart, but I now believe that, if someone wants to experiment or whatever, I just don't, just like you said, I feel that everything is God energy, and everything, and we were brought here to this material world to experience. I've had, I'm not going to say that all of my experiences have been horrible and, oh, stay away, because I've had some really beautiful
Mhm.
connections and experiences. I honestly, I used to argue with one of my therapists about it. She would say, Elizabeth, it retards the experience. That's what she would say. And I'm like, I don't know, doors of perception kind of thing. Maybe it's opening it up to a different, not necessarily clouding this one. So I believe that it's an individual journey. I also know that myself individually, that I know, like, in becoming aware and becoming more present in my body, I see how certain exterior things affect me now. And I get to make the decision, okay, this is how this makes me feel. Do I want to do that again? And so I really have shifted to a more observational standpoint where, and I don't admonish myself, anymore. Thank God. Like if I'm out with family, I want to have a drink or whatever, I allow myself to just experience the experience from a neutral standpoint without guilt or shame. And that has been the biggest game changer for me.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I love how you said that, because the observance of, how your behavior and your body reacts after you can indulge in certain
yeah,
substances, once you are out of that active kind of everyday stage of addiction,
yeah,
and say you do move into a place where you start drinking and you have a drink every second weekend, or whatever, indulge in a night of partying, and you decided to take that line or whatever. And now, like, once there was like those times, because my recovery was very kind of broken up in stages, where there would be a setback and then a forward and a setback and a forward. But
yes,
after the times of being off for a certain amount of months, I could really see the effects it did have on my body, and how long it would take from the time of usage to the time that I felt back to my normal self. But
right,
because I was doing it so often before, I never had enough time to see the effects, because there wasn't enough space and then reflection
right.
back.
And
So, I
have been,
mean, for me, I wouldn't have had the awareness of that without the back and forth of the journey.
yeah. And, when you said that, it reminded me of, my bestie, Peter Levine again, because one of the things that and this was a huge game changer for me too. He talks about, like, when you are regulating, that you have to do it in a titrated way. So if you think of like two liquids, like, in the chem lab, if you put them together too quickly, they combust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. So you want to, so change comes in a titrated way, and so the back and forth, the give and take, that is a part of the experience, and that is a part of healing, and so being able to not admonish myself for, that back and forth in
Mm-hmm.
my own has just made all of the difference, just to know that, okay, this is a part of the process. This,
It does. And I feel like it's that kind of like a diamond, like you're being crushed and you're being pressured, but what you're really doing. And sometimes that back and forth helps you, because each time you then develop a new strategy
yeah,
for the next time, it's like perfecting the process. And some people need to learn that way. And for myself, it was the only way. And that, I think, is where we will branch out on next week's episodes, so that we
absolutely,
can really look at this from a lot of different perspectives, because not everybody heals the same way. And I think that's the focus that we want to touch base on, is that there are many ways to create healing for ourselves, and it's not the way everybody, or the mainstream one size fits all to healing modality.
absolutely. And thank you, Jackie. And that is a good place to end, that we are all individuals, that we all are on our own individual healing journeys. And so for those of you out there listening, that this is about finding what works for you. And, what anyone else has to say about your own particular journey, I mean, there's no reason. But thank you guys so much for joining us today as we began to lift the veil around the effects of sexual trauma and addiction. Your comments and your perspectives are so important to us. So please reach out. Tell us what you thought. I mean, we pulled up a lot of, variety of ideas today. So please let us know. And if you have any questions that you'd like for us to explore on our show or anything else concerning our podcast, contact us at sex, drugs, and spirituality podcast at gmail.com.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Friends, myself and Elizabeth are both practitioners. So if you are interested in working with us to assist you on your own healing journey and you're interested in individual client offerings, please go ahead and use the link below. This will take you to our individual pages and allow you to look a little bit more in depth about the work that we're doing individually. Don't forget to make sure you mention that you heard about us on Spotify, because we do look forward to connecting with our spiritual community every Saturday night at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
So make sure you click that follow button, hit that bell so you never miss an episode, because we are going to continue to explore and integrate the shadow sides of our reality. And we can't wait to see you guys again next Saturday night. Love and light, friends.
Love and light.
Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality Podcast. Elizabeth Maria, Unlimited LLC. And Jackie Lyons of Akashic Energy Healing is not responsible nor liable for any advice, course of treatment, diagnosis, or any other information, services, or products that you obtain through this website.